Yes, I got a haircut, and it kind of sticks out a bit, which is weird unless I put it behind my ear a bit, like that. It helps. Anyway, why would we preach atheism? Well, first of all, we don't really preach atheism, not in the same way that you would preach a religion, at least. Instead, one would advocate and educate, but let's get on to the video.
Why do atheists, from an evolutionary perspective, preach atheism? So let's assume that the Darwinian mechanism, Darwinian evolution, whatever it is true, is literally true, fact. If that's the case, then what we do in our lives should be based upon survival and reproduction. So if the atheist is going to say we as human beings evolved the concept of God or the belief in God because it helped us survive, if that's the case, then why would you as an atheist challenge the existence of God? Because it's supposed to be having survival value. So if you challenge it, that clearly means you don't believe it has survival value, therefore there is no Darwinian explanation for it. But if you want to say, no, actually it does have survival value, then you need to explain why atheism exists in the first place. Because if theism gives you survival value, then why do atheists actually exist? So either way, they're between a hard place and a rock.
Okay, so why would we fight against something that has survival value? Well, if something has survival value, or had survival value, then it can still be pushed too far and be detrimental. Like our ability to find patterns is so sensitive that we see patterns where there are none, which leads to superstition. Like people relying on alternative medicines instead of actual medicine which actually works. Or people can outcast other people for fear of them being cursed or bad luck or something to that effect. Or our tendency to form groups and in-groups. That tribalism can lead to contention and conflicts and even violence between groups and tribes. Even if something has survival value, it can be detrimental to either yourself or to others when it's pushed too far. But theism can be wrong even if it is beneficial, and perhaps the atheist doesn't need or doesn't feel the need for theism in order to survive. Maybe that need is just outdated. But I don't think that theism per se does have survival value, but instead I think that religion is more of a product of other traits that we have that do have survival value. Namely, our tendency to see patterns where there is none, and our social intuitions. We create things, and we come to understand the concept of creation, and then we see creation everywhere in nature, where there is none. And then, when large groups of people agree on fabricated doctrine and stories, it becomes socially beneficial to agree and fit in with everyone else. There's also the fact that young children will believe pretty much anything that is told to them by people that they trust, and none of that means that religion is true or that we need religion today.
So, Jerry, as an atheist, did you used to go around preaching atheism? Was that something that really drove you?
No.
Why? Why not?
Well, I say I didn't actively preach it, but I was willing to discuss it if you came to me and said you believe X, Y, and Z.
But would you write a book on it? Would you do conferences on it?
It's all, man. No, no. I reached the conclusion when I became atheist. Not too long after, I became nihilist.
Right.
And
What does that mean? What does that mean?
That means that everything is pointless. Utterly, totally, and completely pointless. And it doesn't matter what I or anyone else do in between the time we are born and the time we die.
Right.
Yeah. And I still hold to the principle that this is the only honest interpretation of atheism.
Atheism isn't something that needs to be interpreted. I don't believe in a god, and that's pretty much it. It's not a stance or outlook on life, necessarily, nor is it a philosophy. It's simply a lack of one particular kind of philosophy. As an atheist, you're free to have whatever non-theistic philosophy you like.
What if I was to play devil's advocate and say, yeah, that's your view when you are an atheist, that your particular view that life is pointless, but I, as an atheist, I want to help the world. I want to feed people. I want to be good. I want to contribute. How do you reply to an atheist like me?
I would sweep the legs out from underneath that argument with one sweep and say, you want to contribute to what? The world, yeah? Yeah, but you cannot contribute to it, because if you believe, as you should as an atheist, that it's pointless, you know, you can continue doing your pointless random acts, which you call contribution, but the base of the world itself stays pointless. So in reality, you don't contribute anything. The only way you can improve that situation is if you happen to discover that things are not pointless and that you have a purpose.
You completely misunderstand the argument. It's not that we just want to contribute without knowing why. It's that our want to contribute is what gives us purpose. See, to say that nothing really matters is true, but only from a certain point of view. In the grand scheme of the cosmos, there's no real point to anything. Everything just happens. There's no purpose. However, we don't live in or make our decisions from that perspective. Instead, we live in the perspective of ourselves, our communities, our countries, and our world. Sure, my circle of friends doesn't really matter to the totality of the universe, but it matters to me. The solar system doesn't care whether or not the Earth's air is polluted, but we do. Well, some of us anyway. And our countries don't matter to the universe as a whole, but it matters to the world as a whole, and it matters to the individual. So if we can embed our world, our country, our community, or ourselves, then we are doing something that helps someone, and that matters to someone. We're not trying to impress the universe, but instead, as social animals, we want to help both ourselves and others, and we don't need a god to give us that.
What you call contribution, I call nothing. I call spending your time in a certain way, and I can spend it in the opposite way. I can call that my contribution. My contribution is equally as meaningless as your contribution, whatever they may be.
Meaningless to what? Or to whom? That changes based on perspective, which you've kept ambiguous.
You know, I mean, why shouldn't they suffer anyway? Because constant happiness is bad for human beings. You know, there's growth in suffering if you handle it the right way. Constant rainbows and butterflies
And rabbits.
will lead to weakness in a human being, mentally, physically, and spiritually.
Absolutely.
You know, there's no growth there. You know, there's not even any real happiness there.
Yeah.
You cannot be content in this way, because you build up a resistance to these delights and these little,
Absolutely.
you know.
I disagree. You don't need suffering in order to know happiness. You only really need a lack of happiness to compare it to. I also don't know what this has to do with the rest of the video.
So, when an atheist, like for example, we went to the World Atheist Convention in 2011, and there was atheists from across the world who bought tickets to fly over to this place to discuss why God doesn't exist, and a different speaker came, and what he was discussing about was why God doesn't exist, and another speaker came about why God doesn't exist. I mean, it's kind of strange.
That's not what the convention was about. Let's look at some of the actual topics, shall we? It includes communicating atheism, secular education, teach, don't preach, women atheist activists speaking out against blasphemy laws, religion, accommodate or confront, building secular coalitions, and Dublin Declaration on Religion in Public Life. It seems to me that they're talking a lot about social stuff as well as a little bit of socio-political stuff. Could it be that there are social and socio-political issues surrounding religion and irreligion? Or am I just crazy?
You know, it's not like, for example, I don't believe in fairies. I hope you don't either. If I don't believe in fairies and you don't believe in fairies, I'm not going to say to you, Jerry, bro, let's get together in Dublin and let's bring together other people who don't believe in fairies from across the world. There's this guy who's written a book about why fairies don't exist, and this guy who has an excellent talk about why fairies don't exist, and let's have a fairy bashing convention, anti-fairy convention. That'd be quite pointless.
Well, you've just given power to the people who hold the belief that fairies do exist.
Yeah, by attacking them.
You know?
Well, I don't think that your analogy is very analogous. I mean, imagine that what you just said happened, but in a world where most everyone believed in fairies, and you would be mocked, chastised, or ostracized for not sharing their silly beliefs. or, in some areas, even killed for not believing in fairies, as there would be governments founded almost entirely on their idea of what the fairies want from us. Can you see how, then, it would be important to talk about such issues?
And even if they do believe it, going back to the base of atheism, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Their belief in fairies is just as valid as your belief in the non-existence of fairies.
Yeah.
I mean, how does it affect your life in the least?
Yeah.
Zero.
My whole family is deeply religious, and I'm afraid to tell them that I'm not, because I'm afraid that they'll look down on me for the rest of my life and perhaps want little to do with me. How does this affect my life? There are people who are kicked out of their own homes because they don't share the faith of their families. How does this affect my life? With Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and Scientologists especially, they are kicked out, completely ostracized and shunned, left with no contact with anyone that they've ever known and loved, potentially since they were born, because they left the faith. How does this affect my life? You know damn well, as a Muslim, that the penalty for apostasy in Islam is death. According to you, or at least your religion, I don't know your personal views, one should be killed for leaving the Islamic faith, and yet you have no idea why atheism would matter to anyone. It's not just a difference in opinion or beliefs. It's about being left out, looked down on, or even hated and killed for not being the same as everyone else. Maybe you've just been in an overly civilized area for too long to see the obvious.